What do you think about when people come to you saying that, James, pastor, are you sure there's free will? How would you approach those two questions?
Like what you said, one group does believe that it is very because our lives are so reactionary, we're obligated to sort of respond to the things that we see. And so that might not necessarily be free will. Whereas the other camp would say, well, you still have a choice to respond or not respond. We're totally breaking this down in some of the most watered down ways possible. So I'm just doing this for the sake of conversation but I think those are sort of the bigger thoughts that I've heard. In terms of what I personally believe, because I think that was the second part of the question, I still do think that we do have free will, even if we are responding to someone's situation emotionally or reactively or whatever the case is. The reality is we still had a choice to listen to that person or to walk away from the conversation. Now, what we're sort of addressing here is the reaction based on time, right? Within the context of the conversation. Within that specific moment, yes, you will react. If you share with me something that's very sad and devastating, yes, I will grieve with you in those moments. And I think, sure, there's an obligation for me to agree with you, but one can argue there's not necessarily free will in that particular instance. But is that one instance definitive in terms of how we describe our livelihood, time and space and all these things? No, it's just one point. Yeah, if you want to make an argument and say we don't have free will in that one moment, okay, sure. I won't die on that hill. I'll say, okay, why not? But am I going to use that one plot point to define the entirety of who we are? No, absolutely not. Even with food. I love, for example, eating sushi. Sushi and Korean barbecue. They're amazing. Now, if I'm going to be at a crossroads one day where I tell my wife, hey, let's go eat dinner. Some might say I don't have free will because it's my wife's decision, but I'd like to think that I do have decision-making capacity. I have free will to choose. So this conversation of free will, it really depends on how deep you want to go into it, how you'll define every single action. And I think this is where it gets really messy for a lot of people. And this is where most people tune out. And I don't blame them because it gets so heavy in terms of metaphysics and epistemology and then all these other fun topics of philosophy. But that's sort of a short, very concise, not concise explanation of that.
Yeah, so what is a libertarian free will?
It's pretty much our capacity as humans to experience free will within our scale. It's pretty much your capacity to experience free will and my capacity to experience free will. And that we have it because we're human. There's a lot more nuance to this, obviously, but this is a very rudimentary definition of it. So feel free to cast stones at me later for misrepresenting it.
So is that along the same train of thought of like, I think, therefore I am? Like, is it the same translation as because we are humans, innately we have a certain level of free will within our realm of experience because we are humans? Or are they different thoughts?
I think the Cartesian philosophy, the whole I think therefore I am, or the cogito as people like to say, that's a little bit different because I think that's more about metaphysics and also in some sense existentialism. Descartes was more talking about how he thinks and he knows that he exists because he thinks. He knows who he is. And it's not like necessarily an identity question, it's more about existence. The free will thing is more so about our capacity to make decisions, our capacity to choose A over B, X over Y, and so on and so forth. So it slightly related, but a little bit different.
I feel like I have to follow up with a few more questions because it's a very vast topic. So how much of your belief in free will do you think is because that free will is an inheritance characteristics of our Christian faith? It's almost like as a philosopher, if you don't believe in free will, on a deeper level, you're almost denying your faith because free will comes with God. It's a buy one, get one free. It's a complete package, right? Because if free will didn't exist, then God cannot exist because that's what the Bible and scripture is based off of. So I'm just trying to see how much of your belief in free will is outside of the container of your faith.
Oh, yeah. And this is a point that theologians, pastors, and philosophers too, they sort of debate on this because it's really a matter of how much free will do we really have. Well, I think for me, free will makes the most sense. And the reason why I say this, especially as a Christian, as a believer, is because at the end of the day, when judgment and stuff happens, we're going to be judged for everything, right? For all the good and all the bad. And it doesn't make sense to me to be judged for something that I'm not responsible for if free will doesn't actually exist. How can anyone, for that matter, judge me for something that I did when I didn't really have a choice in that matter? If God didn't create us to have free will, then that means that every single action that I take is all ordained by Him. That He knows that I'm gonna drink green tea from this mug. If this is a grave sin of me drinking green tea in this mug, and He ordained me to do this, then the responsibility portion becomes very fuzzy. Now, I know that there's people that have sort of worked this out, but for me, I haven't really heard good reasons or good evidence or good arguments for that stuff. And so this is where I really hold to the fact that we do have free will. And also, it makes sense to me too, because we're all unique. We all have desires. We all have capabilities to do things. We all have skill sets. And the reality is that maybe some of it is psychological, in a sense that because of our upbringing or because of our parents or whomever, that we have certain proclivities. That makes sense to me. But at the same time, we still had a certain passion or a certain desire or capability to choose something. I didn't have to go down this route of studying philosophy and trying to learn and be a better thinker. I didn't have to go down this route of becoming a pastor, or I didn't have to go down this route of understanding counseling and psychology from a Christian perspective. But I did, because these are all things that interested me at the end of the day. Before, I was a terrible student, right? I'm the guy that flunked classes. I'm the guy. I think I graduated high school with like a 1.5 or something ridiculous, right? And so I was a poor student. Even in undergrad, I had about 10 different majors. And so I'm not the guy that, like, I knew what I wanted to do, and it was always predestined for me to do this from day one. I had to figure this stuff out. And there's a lot of trial and error, but I think a lot of that trial and error speaks to free will. I mean, in the past, people would tell me I should do this, and I tried it, and I'm like, oh, I hate this. Why am I doing this? And I could have stuck with it because someone told me, oh, this is what God desired. But, at a certain point, I'm like, is this really what God desired? And I realized, no, this is what someone else desired for me. And so, I went somewhere else.
I know you're very big about thinking, like metacognition aspect. And it's such an undervalued skill set now, because I think a lot of people outsource their thinking to crowds or the certain thinkers or public figures they uphold on a pedestal. They're like, oh, if I follow his or her or their belief, then I don't have to think for myself because they're famous, they're popular, they're smart. But I think that is the worst illness of our current generation and current era, because you can't outsource your thinking, because confirmation bias, you're adhering to someone else's idiosyncrasies, their belief system, and you might not fit into that pattern or that box, period, if you don't think for yourself.
You're absolutely right about that. And that a lot of that is what really grieves me about people nowadays. They're more quick to share someone else's opinion as opposed to their own opinion. And, when I'm asking for someone's opinion, or when I'm talking to someone, I'm talking to you, right? Like in the context of our conversation, I'm talking to you, Benoit. I'm not talking to my friend, out there that lives in New York. I'm not talking to my wife right now. I'm talking to you. And I'm interested in the things that you say, despite my agreement, and I care about these things because I care about you and because I'm in tune to the conversation that we're having. If I wanted the opinion of some politician or some thinker, then yeah, I'll just look it up on Google, or I'll read one of their books. And I think that's sort of the lost art of communication that we're seeing nowadays, because things are so inflammatory. People are quick to share sort of this more popular perspective, and I sympathize with that. It could be because people want to be accepted or they want to be seen a certain way, but that really grieves me, because I don't form relationships with people. I don't think any of us form relationships with people because we want to get something out of it. We do it because, we genuinely care for the other person and we want to be with them. We want to spend time with them. And a lot of that spending time means sharpening ideas. Right? It means exchanging ideas. It means growing. It means disagreeing. It means agreeing, and yeah, we can always bring in certain perspectives that someone else might have. If we're talking about philosophy, I might tell you something that my faculty mentor, my supervisor said, and that can be a great data point, but it's not going to be a conversation where I adopt his views and say, these are my own views. I think that's a little bit dishonest first off, and I don't really know that actually progresses the conversation. And if I'm just bringing in views to make it seem like I'm an intellectual, the reality is that I have a lot of lack. There's a lot of things that I don't know, especially in the world of philosophy and theology. I'm a small time guy. Right? I'm not Tim Keller. I'm not Bill Craig. I'm not J.P. Moore. I'm not these like greats. I'm just James Lee here living in L.A. or Orange County now, right? And and I definitely don't want to misrepresent myself, especially amongst friends who I know care for me. I'd rather just be honest and be authentic in that sense.